A very happy Sabbath to each one of you. I guess I have to look at the slides behind me. You know, this advice of Jesus to love our enemies and do good to them that do bad things to us is a very difficult one to follow. And sometimes we don't know how to do it. I recently learned one way of doing it. Disarm your enemy. And we'll describe how that is done. Most of the time, we know whether people love us or they hate us, whether they are friends or enemies, by communication. If people love us, they'll talk sweetly. We've got many things to talk about. If they don't like us, it might be the silent treatment. They don't pick up our phone calls. At the worst, they give us insults. So, how do we handle it? All this is called communication. And when God showed His love to the world, He communicated to us through His Son, Jesus Christ. In fact, He called Him the Word. If John chapter 1, verse 1 says, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God, and then the Word came to us in human form. Verse 14, He was incarnated. So, if God loves us, He talks to us. And the best thing that He did in His communication was send Jesus, called the Word. So you can imagine how important to show love through our words. So if you want to love your enemy, you must learn to talk sweetly to your enemy. And that's not easy. But the reason God gave us communication is to develop loving, saving relationships. Without communication, you cannot develop loving, saving relationship. Now, in the past, I believed that there was only, or there was nothing I could bring to heaven except my character. And many of you have learned in this church that the only thing you can bring with you to heaven is your character. But some years ago, I was convicted that another thing you can bring with you to heaven, relationships. Your relationship with your family, relationship with friends, relationship with people you've brought to Christ, that will continue in heaven. So there are two things you can bring with you, your character and relationships. So Christ says, but I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. In another similar text in Luke 6:35, but love ye your enemies and do good and lend, hoping for nothing again. And your reward shall be great, and ye shall be the children of the highest, for He is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil. So the only reason you and I would want to develop relationship with difficult people is because God loves them and has put that love in our hearts. And doing so will save them and save ourselves, developing this relationship. The biggest tool of developing relationship is communication, good or bad. And I told you that it's why the Word of God, Jesus Christ, was sent to us. He wanted to communicate His love. He wanted to develop a relationship through the Word. Bad communication is inborn from a sinful, selfish spirit. And since we are all born sinful, bad communication is as easy and as natural as breathing. If you know how to breathe, if you can breathe, if you cannot stop breathing, that's how easy bad communication is. You cannot stop it. You're born evil. You're sinful. You're selfish. So you don't have to learn to do bad communication. It is natural. Good communication you've got to learn. Now, bad communication is our tendency and comes out as retaliation. You hit back harder than the blow you receive because you want to be sure that the person who hit you gets the message. Don't beat me again, I'll beat you up. And we do it through our words, and some people end up with action. Just a couple of weeks ago, I saw in the newspaper, 2 people had an argument in a coffee shop, and one ended up stabbed to death, murdered. So, words can kill when they are translated into action. So, it's very important that we communicate correctly so we don't kill. But, Christ says, if you hate your brother, you've already committed murder. And some of us can kill with our eyes. If looks can kill, you've already killed. And if thoughts can kill, you've already killed. So we must learn to communicate correctly with our eyes, with our thoughts, everything, if we want to develop good relationship, saving relationship. Now, before we go into the good communication, I want to let you know that there are some bad communication methods that we use so we can abstain from some of these. For example, one is called truth. I'm telling the truth and you're lying. I am right and you're wrong. You do not have the truth. So that's one of the ways people communicate. And they are very difficult to handle. Sometimes we are that way too. Number 2, we tend to blame others. They are at fault, not because of us. Something terrible has happened. Somebody else did it. Number 3, martyrdom. I am being victimized. And so you complain. You're making me a victim. You're unfair. That's bad communication. Number 4, hopelessness. The situation is so bad, I'm not going to argue with you anymore. I give up. And that's a slap in the face to the other person, that they cannot communicate. They are poor at communication. Actually, you are poor at communication just as much. Number 5, denial. Insisting that I'm not angry, I'm not hurt or sad. I'm just speaking the facts. But people can tell when you speak the facts that you're angry, you're hurt, but you deny that. Passive aggression, pout. You withdraw, you slam the door and walk out. But you haven't hurt the person physically, you see. You just walk out. It's called passive aggression. Another way of poor communication is someone trying to tell us how they feel and so on, and we try to help, try to solve the problem. Men are better at that than women. Men always try to come up with solutions. Something wrong? Okay, let me tell you how to fix it. This and this. And all the time the person is just asking for understanding, for listening ears. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, but men, I think, tend to use the mouth rather than the 2 ears. Women too. It depends on the situation. Right. Sarcasm, words or tone of voice with hostility. Yes, you're right. You're always right. How many of you heard that? I've heard that many times. I think I've used it too. Sarcasm. Defensiveness, refusal to admit wrong. Yeah. I know some people like that all through their life. And some parents are like that. The children say, my parents never admit they're wrong. They're always right. I can't stand it, So children, listen carefully because you will learn how to handle your parents. Number 10, counterattack. The best defense is attack. So if someone attacks us, we bring up their faults. You do it too. A few years ago or last month, you did the same thing. And it's similar to number 11. You bring up history. If someone attacks you, what you're doing now, you distract, and it's natural as breathing. You bring up the faults from history. You have your computer bank of all the memory, and you bring up the list. You attack me on one thing, let me tell you 3 things. And so you don't solve the problem at all. You have just evaded. So those are all bad forms of communication, and I dare to say that I've used all of them, and so have you. And it's good to learn a different way of communication. Good communication needs to be learned, and mastering it, if you can master it, takes hard work and prolonged practice till it becomes second nature. You don't really know how well you've learned it until a crisis happens, until you're faced with a problem. Then only you know whether you've learned well in your communication, or in anything actually that demands character. A good communication allows the listener to express their feelings. And the listener is encouraged to speak, to express their feelings. And the listener will listen attentively. So, communication is admitting feelings of the other person, accepting their feelings, and expressing your own feelings. When people share feelings, they have developed a relationship. Good communication also enhances understanding of each other, does not end up in argument. It improves and deepens relationship. If you have an angry argument, it's a sure sign that you have done bad communication. It's a sure sign. So anytime I or you have a bad argument, we are not communicating. And it is not love, not loving. So we have to learn to overcome that. So how do we do it? There are many methods. I'm going to focus on just one method today. It's called disarming the enemy. In disarming the enemy, the technique, if you call it a technique, is to find some truth, even a little grain of truth, like a little piece of salt, a little grain of truth in what the other person is saying. Even if at the first, when you hear the communication from the other person, you're convinced that what they are saying is totally wrong, unreasonable, irrational, unfair. Even that, you should still be able to find a grain of truth and tell the person you agree with a grain of truth. And you will learn to disarm the person. Look at this gun. Is it good for anything? This gun has been disarmed. Cannot be used. So, when someone insults you, they're pointing a gun at you, they're shooting at you, and it hurts. You got to make their gun become like in this picture, unusable. You must disarm the so-called enemy. And how do you do that? Okay, let me give you an example. Someone says to me, all of you say to me, you are listening to me now, Danny O, what you are saying is a lot of hot air because you don't practice what you preach. I'm sure somebody must have already thought of that when I stood up before I said anything, So, I'm being insulted, I'm being attacked, I'm being shot at. How do I disarm these bullets coming at me? Well, answer. I agree with you that my life has not been a good demonstration of what I am preaching. Will you help me in my growth towards the successful application of what I am preaching? I'm saying you're right. I'm not trying to avoid it. But I'm not insulting you back. I'm not saying that I'm right and you're wrong. I'm not using sarcasm. You think you're so good? Huh? You also have the same problem. You don't preach what you don't do what you preach. No, I'm avoiding all the bad communication and agreeing with you. And I'm asking for your help. What's so bad about that? That's the right way of disarming a person. He's shooting at you, and you're saying, yes, I'm dead. So, what's the use of shooting a dead person? He's already dead. So, there's no point in shooting at you anymore. He's killed you. And you say, I'm dead. Okay, so that's disarming. No more bullets. All right. Another example. Someone says, now I'm using this church as an example because I think a lot of you who are members will have seen some of these criticisms. Those of you who are not members of our church, just listen and enjoy, okay? So someone says, I will never join the SDA church. It is a cult. How many have heard that before? Raise your hand. Anybody? Wow, so many of you. That's a lot. It's a very common thing. So you're being shot at. The church is being shot at. What do you say to it? How do you communicate? How do you disarm the bullet coming at you? Think about it. Some of you must have some answers. But here's my answer. I say cults are very scary. Correct? That's what the person insulting me is saying. You're scary. You worship this cult. So I agree. Yeah, cults are scary. Just like you, I'm afraid of cults. Please tell me why you think the SDA church is a cult. So you're inviting the person to say more about how your church is a cult. When the person says the church is a cult, you don't really know how to answer because there are no specifics. You don't even know what they mean by a cult. You don't even know what you do that they see is cultish. So you invite them. You say, I'm scared of cults too. Please tell me how the SDA church is a cult. And then we can deal with it. Once you know what they're thinking, you can deal with it. Don't read their minds and answer things that they're not thinking. Tell them to explain themselves. So, in that way, you can disarm them. You know what kind of bullets they're trying to shoot. Right. Another another example, insult number 3. I don't know how many of you heard of this, but I heard this many, many times. How can SDAs be so arrogant to claim their church to be the true church of God? Now, this is actually true of every church. You know, every church claims that they're the true church of God. Otherwise, members would flee a false church. See, everybody thinks their church is the true church. Okay, but now we're asking the question or giving the insult or criticism to the SDA church. How can you be so arrogant that you claim to be the church of God? How do you answer that? How do you disarm this criticism? Think of it. Well, let me show you what I thought. So I agree with you that our claim does sound extreme and arrogant. It could be even a terrible lie that leads one to hell if it were based on falsehood. Would you please show me our errors? See? You throw the ball back into their court. You agree. We look so arrogant, you know. But now, please show us. Show me how I've been acting arrogant in this claim. You want something specific to work with. Otherwise, it's just argument and hot air going back and forth. All right. So, in disarming a critic, in disarming the insult you're given, you acknowledge the validity in the criticisms. When you do that, you show you're listening. And when you listen, you lessen the frustration of the listener. See, most of the time when I was arguing in the past, I hope I have changed a little bit now, probably not all the way. The moment the other person retorts or retaliates or answer, I'm not listening to the answer. I'm focusing on bringing out the next statement I'm going to say that's even more powerful, that will shoot the other guy, you know. So when in an argument, each one is trying to bring up bigger guns. The pistol doesn't work, I'll bring the rifle, doesn't work, I'll bring my tank, and finally atomic bomb, you know. So I'm busy gathering my arsenal rather than listening. And the other person knows, because he's also waiting for you to finish your argument and come up with a stronger one. So it's a war of words that doesn't end in victory. And it only ends in frustration. So when you end up saying, I hear you, I agree, you can stop this reinforcement you're trying to bring up the fire at the other person. And the person is not frustrated so much. I don't have to summon up another stronger argument because you've already admitted that you're wrong. Partly. Okay. There was a man 2,000 years ago, a Greek man, Epictetus. He said, if someone criticizes you, agree with them at once. Tell them that if only they knew you well, they would not bother to criticize only that. They will find so many other things to criticize. It's because they don't know you, see. So, agree with them. Because you have many faults. Yeah. In fact, you can volunteer. Oh, is that the only fault you see? I have something else too, you know. And when you are so frank to tell people your faults, you have disarmed them. But when you try to argue that you don't have the fault, you create more problems. When you agree to your faults, you are saying, I'm not afraid of criticism, and I'm willing to listen to what you have to say. You melt the hostility and win the day. You take away the frustration of that person who is attacking you. And if you look at Matthew 5:39, it says, but I say unto you that ye resist not evil. Now, I used to not understand what that meant, you know. But if you look at it with the view of admitting your faults, it makes more sense. But I say unto you that ye resist not evil. But whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. Yeah, you think I have only one fault? Let me show you another fault I have. I think that's the meaning of it. One way of understanding this text. Agree with your critic and you will disprove what he or she is saying about you. Try to disagree with your critic and you will increase his or her conviction that the accusations are absolutely valid. Here's an example, okay? Your critic says, and you have heard that, and I have heard this too many times. It's all your fault. I'm right and you're wrong. Why don't you just admit it and stop being so stubborn? How many have heard of that? Raise your hand. Oh, a few, huh? Yeah. It's very common. Common way of communication. I'm right and you're wrong. I have the truth. So, what is a good answer? A good answer is called a persuasive answer. I probably have been acting stubborn. So you're disarming. You accepted already. I'm dead. Don't shoot anymore. You say things are my fault, and I'm willing to accept my share of the blame. Yeah. And this is empathy. You are understanding how the person feels. And disarming him, because you tell him how he feels. You're correct. There is truth in what you're saying, and I want to understand your point of view a little better. I'm frustrated too because I'm not getting my ideas across. And here you're not saying, you're stupid, you don't understand me. You're saying, I feel I'm not getting my ideas across. And what you feel is not what the other person feels. He cannot deny that's what you feel. It's not a criticism. So you use statements that show your feeling. I want you to try to understand how I feel. Okay? So that's actually another technique that we are not going into so deeply. Using I feel statements. So that's a good answer. Why is it a good answer? Because the answer will disprove the criticism that you always claim to be right, that you're stubborn. Because you're assuming some responsibility for the problem. You say, yeah, I feel that part of the problem is my stubbornness. You are rising above your critics' childish blame casting. By showing your flexibility and willingness to listen, you have proven that you're not as stubborn or as wrong as your critic claims. See, he's claiming you're always right. You just said you're wrong. You agree with him. So immediately his criticism has been shot down. He has been disarmed. Now what about a wrong answer, a defensive answer, which is the most common type? We are born with it. It's as easy as breathing. You say, you can blame me until kingdom comes, but you'll just be proving how childish you are. Now it feels good to say that. I have to tell you, that's why it's so hard to give up. It's an addiction. And when I was doing one of my sermons, studying addiction, it says there's one part of our brain, in the middle of our brain, that if you think of chocolates, it lights up. And if you think of sex, the same place lights up. If you think of revenge, it lights up. The same area that likes chocolate also likes revenge. So, revenge is sweet. That's why it is so addicting. It's so easy to do. Not firing back, shooting back, is very difficult. So it comes with practice over many weeks, if we are willing to change. All right. So you can blame me until kingdom comes, or you'll just be proving how childish you are. Wow, that feels so good. Let's add on to that. It's just stupidity to insist you're entirely right and I'm entirely wrong. The fact is you're just as much to blame. Why? Why don't you just admit it and say, oh, well done, pat yourself on the back, feels so good. But it's the wrong answer, this defensive answer, because it confirms the criticism. How? Because you're contradicting your critic in an argumentative way. He or she will feel even more convinced that you are stubborn and inflexible. Your critic will feel attacked and will counterattack. The war of words will continue. So what can we do to improve our communication skill today? I think there are several things we can do. One of the things is to remind ourselves in Romans 12:2, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Of course, we can't do it ourselves, but we've got to be willing so that the Spirit of God can work in us to cause a transformation of our thinking. That's what it takes. This natural, inborn, selfish, sinful person like me must be willing for the Spirit of God to change my way of thinking. Things should not continue as in the past. Really, truly, we must love God with all our hearts and all our souls and our neighbor as ourselves. That's the advice of Jesus in Matthew 22:36-40. If you don't love your neighbor, you shoot him. He slaps you slap back. But when you love your neighbor, you will try to disarm him. You try to restore the relationship. improve it. And you know, who is our neighbor? Every person we meet is a candidate for heaven and needs us to lead them to that glorious goal. So we should use good communication with anybody. Some people are hard to communicate with, but those are the ones probably who need it most, the love that we have. They probably have fewer friends than others that are easier to befriend. So, how do you disarm the next critic that comes our way? Some prerequisites. We have to believe that the critic is a person loved by God and as precious to God as ourselves. Then we'll work at it to create that relationship. Number two, we have a responsibility to improve our relationship with the critic and with God. Every person is loved by God. Every person is a potential citizen of heaven. And each Christian here is an evangelist. It's your responsibility, it's my responsibility to improve our relationship. Number three, we must use the disarming technique, see some truth in whatever accusation or insult that is thrown at us. And number four, for good communication, we encourage the critic's feelings, tell him to tell us more, and try to understand him. There is a statement here which has been attributed to St. Francis of Assisi, and some attribute to Stephen Covey, the one who wrote the 7 Habits of Successful People. Seek to understand rather than be understood. And you will do that only as you love the person that you're communicating with and want to develop a loving relationship. So let's go out of here today giving up the bad communication methods and remembering the good communication method, which is disarming. Agree with your so-called enemy that you have a fault and go on from there. And I think each one of us will be a better evangelist for the kingdom of God.